Every game is fun for some people and boring for others. So what kind of game do you need to bring to a table full of people whose taste in games is all over the place? My name's Joan, I'm your games mistress, and today we are going to be unpacking Incan Gold. Now, this isn't a review, although it might help you to decide whether or not this game is for you, and it's not exactly a tutorial, though it will show you how to teach it to your friends. What it is a close look at what this game does, why it works, and how you can make the most of it when it's on your table. So let's get unpacking. Most games are all about making decisions, and for a lot of people, being put into a position where you have to make a decision, even one that doesn't really have any real-world consequences, can make them feel very anxious, especially if there's somebody watching. Players who feel that way about games tend to gravitate toward titles that don't really have any decisions at all, games like Snakes and Ladders, or most trivia games. Or maybe games where there technically are decisions involved, but there's no particular reason not to just make them at random, like Battleship or Roulette. But for other people, games without meaningful decisions, where the players can't ever seem to do anything to steer the outcome of the game, can feel pointless and boring. I mean, if the game's just going to play itself, they figure they'd rather watch a movie instead. Now, it's been my experience that this divide between players who want to participate and engage with the game on one hand, and players who just want to be entertained on the other, is usually the single most challenging obstacle when it comes to finding a way to entertain a mixed group of players. The people in each of these two camps might be willing to indulge the others for the sake of getting along, but if they're playing something from the far opposite end of their comfort zone, they probably won't enjoy the experience very much. So how do you walk that tightrope? What kind of a game is it going to take to entertain a group that includes both of these types? Well, sad truth is, it's not always possible. Some groups are just so divergent in their tastes that there is no one game that could possibly satisfy them all. But one of the titles I've had the best results with in cases like these is Incan Gold, by Alan Moon and Bruno Faidutti. Incan Gold is what we in the business like to call a press your luck game. That means you're going to be making one decision over and over again, and that decision is always pretty much the same. Do I stop now and collect what I've gained so far, or do I try for more and risk the possibility of losing it? This simple yet meaningful decision provides just enough substance to interest the mind of a player who really wants to play, without being too intimidating for players who don't feel so comfortable putting themselves out there and risking the chance that they might be made to feel bad. We'll go into more detail about all of this in a little while, but first, there's something else important that I need to unpack, and that is this game's subject matter. The Incas were the largest civilization in the Americas before European colonizers showed up. They did a lot of incredible things in a lot of different fields, including architecture, economics, agriculture, transportation, medicine, and more. And pretty much all of that was brutally crushed by smallpox and the Spanish. Since then, the treasures and artifacts of the Incas, as with a lot of indigenous peoples around the world, have been made into a subject for fun treasure hunting adventures for people who look like this dude. And, well, people who look like me. Well, maybe not exactly like me, but you get the point. So let's get this out of the way right now. Does it make you a bad person if you have a good time playing games like this without thinking too hard about questions like the origins of the treasures that you're hunting, or what happened to the people who made them, or who those treasures should rightfully belong to today? Well, obviously I wouldn't be making this video if I thought it does. I mean, there's plenty of questionable stuff in my favorite media, and unless you're very, very stringent about these things, you've got your own problematic phase too. Like, I think somebody on the internet said this once: it's both possible and even necessary to simultaneously enjoy media while also being critical of its more problematic or pernicious elements. I think they might have been talking about some kind of screen-based media at the time. Anyway, at the tabletop, there's an additional dimension to take into account, and that is your fellow players. Now, a lot of people are willing and able to just say something like, well, yeah, I mean, it's totally not cool what was done to the Incas, but this game isn't really about that, so we're just going to hand-wave it for now. But if there's one of your fellow players at the table who has Peruvian grandparents, maybe they won't be quite so comfortable with that. Or maybe they'll be totally fine with it. I mean, I'm certainly not going to tell them that they're supposed to be offended. I'm also not going to tell them that they're not supposed to be offended. Maybe the people at your table enjoy defusing this stuff with a little bit of dark humor. Yep, we're totally stealing more ancient ancestral treasures, yay colonialism. Maybe with the particular mix of people playing at your table that night, that tone really works. Maybe it lets you acknowledge these gross things from history that usually get glossed over without ruining the fun of the game. But depending on how your fellow players feel about it, that might not fly either. For some folks, it could easily do more harm than good. Maybe your group might have fun turning some of these treasure hunting tropes on their heads. Maybe you could play Incan Gold from a different perspective for a change. You could just decide that for this game, instead of the Andes Mountains, our setting is going to be London, England. And instead of going into an unnamed temple to get these treasures, we're going to be breaking into the British Museum. I would totally play a game about grabbing treasures from the British Museum. I think that sounds like great fun. But then again, most of my board game playing friends are white, so I don't really have to think too hard about whether or not I'm going to be talking down to them on account of their ethnicity. Maybe have a copy of the European edition of this game, which says Diamant on the cover instead of Incan Gold, which means it's still basically the same treasure hunting idea without specifically mentioning the Incas, and I have no idea if that makes it better or worse. Also, that version of the game does have slightly different rules, but we're going to come to that later. I'm going to directly address my fellow sensitive white folks in the audience for just a moment now. I know this stuff can seem complicated, and, well, yeah, issues of race and indigenous rights are complicated, but I believe that when you're examining this one isolated issue of how to have a good time playing games together with other people, you can pretty much distill it all down to one simple rule. Listen to your friends. Listen to what they say, and pay attention to what they don't say, keeping in mind that if it's a table of mostly white folks with one person of color, or mostly dudes with one lady or whatever, that one person might not feel comfortable or safe telling you what they really feel, considering the crowd they're in, and they might not be up to starting that particular conversation just at the moment. So, listen, pay attention, be sensitive and kind. Decency and humanity are never a mistake. Okay. Thank you for bearing with me. If you're an Indigenous person and you've got opinions that you'd like to share about treasure hunting in games, I would love to read about them in the comments. Alright, let's see how you play. And now this is me, the games mistress, teaching you, the person who is probably going to be teaching this game to your friends. So you won't necessarily have to give them all the details that I'm about to tell you. I'm telling you everything so that you can have a complete picture of what's going on here. There's all these piles of treasure here in the middle. Now this is what everybody's trying to collect. These here are worth 1, these are worth 5, and these are worth 10. Whoever's got the most points at the end is going to win. You can make change whenever you need to, and you probably will need to at some point, because the ones, they tend to run out partway through the game. So whenever that happens, just have somebody swap in 5 of these for 1 of these, or 10 of these for 1 of these. Now each player gets a little tent like this, and it's open on one side so you can look in and see how many treasures you've got, and nobody else can see. Technically, they could keep track if they've got a perfect memory, but I'm terrible at remembering this stuff, and that's okay. You don't have to be able to remember things. This is what the tents are here for. Everybody also gets 2 cards. 1 for going back into the temple to look for more treasures, and 1 for heading back to your tent to relax and just put away your treasure. These are the 2 different actions that a player can take during the game. We've also got these 5 cards off to one side, numbered 1 through 5. You're going to play this game in 5 rounds. Like, you know, a boxing match has rounds, like round 1, round 2, round 3. At the end of each round, you're going to take one of these cards and flip it over like this. And the game's over when all 5 of them have been flipped over. At that point, whoever's got the most treasure in their tent is the winner. And finally, there's this deck of cards. It's called the Quest deck in the rules, but I've never heard anybody actually call it that at the table. There's 15 of these blue treasure cards with different numbers on them. There's also 15 red danger cards, like cave-ins and spiders and mummies.
I'm in danger.
You sure are. And there's also 5 of these yellow artifact cards. We're going to set them aside for now. Then we're going to take the rest, the red and the blue ones, shuffle them together, put them in a face-down pile in the middle, and that's the setup. Now, Here's how you play. The top card gets turned face up next to the deck so everybody can see it, and if it's one of these blue treasure cards, you divide that many treasures among all the players. And if it doesn't come out evenly, you give the excess to the card in the middle. So if you've got 6 players, you draw an 11, give everybody 1, and put the other 5 on the card. When players take treasures, those treasures don't go inside their tent just yet. Instead, they go next to their tent. Treasures next to your tent, you haven't scored them yet. Those are in your hands. The ones that are inside your tent, those are safe and they're worth points. But you can't do that until you play a card that says you're going back to your tent. We'll get to that in a bit. Now there's also 15 red cards in the deck, 3 each of 5 different kinds of things that can go wrong when you're in an adventure story and you're exploring an ancient temple looting treasures. As long as there's only 1 red card showing, everything's fine. If there's 2 or 3 different red ones, also fine. But if we ever get 2 copies of the same red card at the same time, the round ends right there, and everybody who hasn't made it back to their tent yet doesn't score any points for this round. They lose all the treasures sitting next to their tent. Now every time we pull 1 more card from the deck, after we see what happens, and either we've dished out some new treasures or we've started worrying about this new disaster that just came up, all of the players who are still in the game, who haven't gone back to their tents yet, have to decide whether they're going to stay and see the next card, hoping for more treasures, or leave, going back to their tent to pack those treasures away. So, they all pick one of their 2 cards like this, and hold it face down, and once everybody's ready, then you all flip, and now we can see who's staying and who's leaving. Everybody who leaves gets to put all their collected treasure inside their tent. Everybody who stays gets to find out whether the next card in the deck gives them more treasure or not. We keep doing this turn after turn. We flip a card from the middle, then everybody decides whether to stay or go. Flip a card, stay or go. Flip a card, stay or go. Keep on like that until everybody has either gone back to their tent, which means the round is over and they all got out safely, or there are 2 copies of the same red card in the middle, which means the round is over because something terrible happened to the ones who didn't get out before that.
Like spiders.
For instance, why is it always spiders?
I don't know. It's upsetting.
They just want hugs.
They do not.
Spider hugs?
No.
Arachna hugs?
No.
Oh wait, come back! I just want to be your friend!
Wouldn't you
No.
hug Tom Holland?
No. Shh.
Tom Holland wants a hug. He's a sweet man. Whatever. If everybody leaves, you can just start the next round. We flip over round cards so we can see what round it is. We shuffle the deck, and you're pretty much good to go. If you get 2 of the same red card, we're going to start the next round, but we're also going to take the last red card and put it underneath like this. Now there's only 2 copies of that disaster left in the deck, so it won't come up as often from now on. Either way, the round is over, and when round 5 is over, that's game. Lift up the tents, count the treasures, see who wins. So that's the basic idea. Now for a few details. First of all, once you go back to your tent, you can't go looking for more treasures again until the next round. You just sit back and relax until then, and usually try to taunt the other players into staying in longer than they really should. Peanut gallery is definitely a factor in this game.
What's a peanut gallery?
Next thing, it may look sort of like it's pretty much always better to stay than to leave, but there are 2 things that can incentivize a player to get out a bit early. 1, when you leave, on your way back, you get to pick up all the treasures that were left sitting on the cards in the middle. And depending on how the math works out, that could actually be a lot. If more than 1 person leaves at the same time, just divide it up evenly. So if there's 5 treasures here in the middle and 3 people leave at the same time, they'll each take 1 and the other 2 stay in the middle. Here's the other reason you might want to leave early. Artifacts. If you're playing Diamant, the version of this game published in Europe, then these won't be in there, so you can skip this part. But if you're playing the Incan Gold version, the game comes with 5 of them, and the deck might have some of them or all of them in it. When you draw one of these, just leave it on the table together with the other cards. There could be 2 or 3 or more artifacts showing, and on any given turn, if exactly 1 person leaves, that person takes all the artifacts. But if more than 1 person leaves on the same turn, nobody gets any artifacts. They still split the treasures, but the artifacts stay right in the middle until exactly 1 person leaves on some future turn. Artifacts don't quite fit inside the tent, so usually we just put them underneath. The first 3 artifacts come out of the temple are worth 5 points each, and after that they're worth 10. If you don't feel like remembering this, you could just give people an onyx gem for 5 points and a gold gem for 10 points, but that's up to you. Now, artifacts are the most complicated thing to learn, and I'm going to show you how to teach your friends the game and get them all having a good time with it without having to teach them how artifacts work right at the beginning. You need to know these details, but they don't have to, not yet. And before we move on, here's a tip for learning new games. Repetition, repetition, repetition. Super useful. So if you're still a little unclear on how to play, give part 2 a rewatch, and maybe a rewatch. Don't sweat it, you'll get it. Whenever you're ready, we can move on to... Okay, so now that you know how the game works, I'm going to show you how to teach it to your friends. It's one thing to know how to play a game, but it's another thing entirely knowing how to teach it to a group of people who are about to play it for the first time. If you have a hard time explaining stuff sometimes, I think you'll find this part of the video really useful. I'm probably going to end up doing quite a few episodes on the subject of teaching games, but I'm just going to touch on a few basic principles this time. And Incan Gold is actually a really good first title to use for this, because it is a pretty simple teach. Usually there's this big divide between people who want to start playing as quickly as possible and learn as they go, and the people who want to hold off, learn every last detail first before they make their first move. And I could do an entire video just about that one distinction, but happily in this case, you won't really have to worry about it because of how simple this game is. And here's one more big, important general principle when it comes to teaching how to play a game. First thing you need to do is make sure your players believe they're going to have a good time playing it. If you take nothing else from this video, please remember this one thing. If you've got players who just aren't into the game you're teaching, then it doesn't matter how smart, how experienced they are, and it's not going to matter how well you know the game or how good you are at teaching. None of what you're telling them is going to stick. They won't retain a thing, and it'll be nothing but frustration for everybody. But if you've got a table full of players who are primed and ready to have a good time, it won't matter so much if they're not that experienced at learning games. They're going to pay attention and put in the effort, and they're going to feel happy about it. And you can probably get away with making some mistakes too, and they'll just forgive you and be all patient and stuff. You know, right? Enthusiasm and excitement can make it easy for any playgroup to overcome just about all the problems that can happen during a teach. So, how are you going to do this? How are you going to sell your friends on the idea of playing Incan Gold? Well, that depends on whether they're veteran game players taking it down a notch with a light game, or inexperienced players just dipping their toes into the pool. When you're dealing with new players, focus on the simplicity. Tell them that thing that I said before about how it's a press your luck game, which means you only ever need to make one choice over and over. Do I stop now and score the points I've got so far, or do I press on trying to get more and risk the possibility of getting nothing? That's easy to grasp, and it usually grabs people's attention right away. If it's veterans you're playing with, don't oversell the complexity. If they go in expecting deep strategy and tactics, they're going to be disappointed. Just tell them there's enough psychology and risk management in it to keep things interesting, even though it's still definitely a light game. If you've got both types, you're going to need to touch on both sides, and I'd recommend looking the new players in the eye when you're talking about the simplicity, and the veterans while you're talking about the depth. Make sure they understand that you've chosen this particular title because it's something that everybody here can enjoy. It's easy enough for new players, but interesting enough for experts. Personally, I think that all by itself is a good reason to get excited about a game. Now, I'm going to be using a technique here that I usually try to avoid, a practice round. Whenever I'm teaching a game, I usually like to just throw the players into the deep end of the pool from turn 1, and I'll probably do a video sometime explaining why, but in this case, we're dealing with a game that is actually a lot easier to show than it is to explain, so that's how we're going to get it across to your players. So, got your table full of players. You open up the box, and right away you want to start giving everybody one of those neat little tents. Everybody likes getting stuff to play with when they're learning a game. So, whenever you're teaching new players, start giving them some stuff as soon as you can. Fold a little seam like this so that they keep their shape, like that. Show them how the little tents are open on one side so they can look in and see how many treasures they've got inside their own tent, but nobody else can. Wait, did you just mention treasures? Why, yes you did. Let's bring those out next. Tell everybody that this stuff right here is what the game is all about. Tell them the turquoise treasures are worth 1 point each, the onyx treasures are worth 5, and the gold ones are worth 10. Make sure you mention that you can make change whenever you need to, and that the turquoises are probably going to run out, so they'll kind of need to do that at some point. And you should definitely ask them to separate these piles by color for you. Lots of people just like helping or having something to do at a time like this, and this is something you can give them. While they're doing that, get the 5 temple cards out, lay them out like this, and put the 5 artifact cards under them, 1 for each, like this. Don't explain the artifact cards yet. If somebody asks, tell them we'll come to it later. So now you tell your players that they're going to be heading into this temple to get treasures, and while they're exploring and picking stuff up, they're going to be picking up those treasures and putting them next to their tent. Next to your tent, that's the stuff you're carrying in your hands right now, and if you leave the temple and go back to base camp, you can put all of those treasures inside your tent, where they are forever safe and nothing bad can ever happen to them. New players and veterans alike usually find it very comforting to have stuff that can't ever be taken away or lost, so be sure to mention that. You can also tell them that at the very end of the game, everybody's going to be lifting up their tent like this, and we're going to see who's got the most points, and that's the winner. But, you tell them, if you take too many risks, if you don't get back to your tent before something terrible happens, you will be forced to drop what you're carrying and flee in terror. You can't actually die in this game, but you might have to drop everything you're carrying and put it back into the middle of the table instead of into your tent, which is where you want it to go. Next, give them their player cards, the torch cards and camp cards. Pass them out to the players. These are for you, and these are for you, and these are for you. Now you've all got 2 cards. One of them has a picture of a dude with a torch going back into the temple to look for more treasure. You're going to play this card when you want to go back into the temple to look for more treasure. And the other card has a picture of a dude leaving to go back to his tent where it's safe. You play that card when you want to leave the temple to go back to your tent where it's safe. Simple enough. I like that little use of repetition. Some people might find it a bit annoying, but I think it's cute, and it really makes it clear for new players that this game is not going to be rocket science, and even if they've had bad experiences with other games because they didn't really make intuitive sense, this one will be different, because it does kind of make sense. And then we have the quest cards. Now, because we're doing a practice round, we can actually cheat a little bit and stack the deck here to make sure that we show all the things we want to show in the order that we want to. So put a treasure on top with a number that's larger than the number of players. So we've got 6 players here. I'm going to use a 9. Nice. Next, I'm going to put a 4. That's a smaller number than the number of players.
It is?
Next, we're going to put in a disaster. Ooh, what should we put in? How about spiders? I think that's a good one.
Figures.
Then another treasure card, and another disaster. Here's a snake. And after that, you can sort of mix it up, but don't have that second matching disaster until you're about 10 cards in. That should make the practice round long enough, but not too long. And if somebody notices that you're stacking the deck, admit to it. Tell them, yep, you are stacking the deck so that you can use the practice round to show how everything works. But make sure you let them know you're going to get somebody else to shuffle when you start playing for real. And if they keep on making jokes about how you're stacking the deck just so you can win, go along with the bit. It's good that they're making jokes. They're getting into the spirit of things. Then, put the deck face down in the middle like this, and you're all set. Now is the big moment. Tell everybody we're all going into the temple, and here's what we find. Ooh, 9 treasures. There's only 6 of us. That's enough for each of us to get 1, and that leaves 3. We're going to put those in the middle. Make sure you remind them the stuff that's next to their tent isn't safe yet. You're carrying in your hands, and you will be forced to drop it if you need to flee in terror. Which reminds me, it's now time for everybody to make their choice, whether to go back into the temple and try and get more treasures, or go back to base, put your feet up, crack a nice beverage, and sit out the rest of the round. But your choice is a secret, and nobody knows what you're going to do until everybody's decided. So what you're going to do now is look at your 2 cards, pick the one you want to do, and hold it out face down like this so nobody else can see it. And once everybody's ready, everybody's got their card in, we all flip, and now we can see who's staying and who's leaving. Now, this first time picking and playing a card is crucial for new players. They're going to spend the entire game doing this, and if they learn to hate it early, it's not going to be much fun for them, so it's important to give them every possible out. First of all, emphasize that this is just a practice round. Secondly, You can pretty much tell everyone after that first card that there isn't a whole lot of danger yet. It's coming, but it's not here yet, so it's pretty safe to stay in and go for more treasures. Usually all the players will pick the stay card and nobody will pick the leave card. Now if somebody does want to go back to their tent, awesome. Make sure you congratulate them for picking up all those nice treasures on their way back home. And tell them that from now on they can just relax and put their cards down on the table next to their tent and let the other players sweat it out for the rest of the round. Sometimes new players don't quite grasp at first that once they play their tent card, they're out for the rest of the round. But with this practice round, they'll be able to come to grips with it quickly. It won't take that long. Now, in my experience, there's often one or two players who accidentally play the wrong card, and it's up to you and the others in your group to decide whether or not they should be forced to do the action for the card they actually played, or if they should be allowed to swap in the one that they really meant to play. This is a really useful moment too, because you can use it to set the tone for the rest of the game. If your group is really into trash talking and making fun of each other, that's part of the enjoyment for you and your fellow players, then you should totally let that be a thing. Let them make fun of the one who's now doing the accidental walk of shame back to their tent. But if the players at your table are maybe a bit more sensitive and not really up for that sort of thing, you're going to want to keep it cool on that front. If somebody's kind of panicking and they really want to swap their other card in, just let them. Just say it's fine, it's only a practice round, everybody makes mistakes their first time playing a new game, don't worry about it. And again, move on right away. Don't dwell on it. They'll probably never make that same mistake again after that. Then, you flip over the next card. Unless a bunch of players went back to base after that first card, there won't be enough treasures for everybody who's still in the round to get one, so you'll put all of them on top of the card. The players will see how that works, and when they pick a card this time, somebody might decide it's worth bugging out to get all those nice treasures on the way home. With the next card, you want to do some sound effects. Spiders! We can hear spiders in the next chamber and they're coming closer. Now this is just a warning, but there are 2 more copies of that spider card in the deck, and if we get another one of those, everybody who hasn't gone back to base yet will have to drop what they're carrying and flee. So, who wants to stay in, try for more treasures? And who wants to get out of here before the spiders arrive? Then you put your card in like this. They'll follow your lead. By this point, they've probably got the general idea. Everybody flips, and maybe somebody leaves, turn over the next card. Ooh, more treasure. So, pass them out, put the rest on the card. Who's staying and who's leaving? Okay, flip, and snakes, we can hear snakes, but it's just a warning. There are 2 more snakes cards in the deck. If we get 1 more of those, or 1 more of the spider cards, we're going to have to run away and lose everything we're carrying. Who's staying and who's leaving? And so on. Just keep going like this until you get 2 of the same disaster. Personally, I recommend that you stay in right till the end. That way everybody can see what it looks like when a disaster happens. Also, they can't accuse you of cheating for stacking the deck. And also, if any of the other players are still feeling a little intimidated by playing with an expert like you, this should help to defuse all of that by showing that you are mortal after all, and that you can be forced to run away from spiders or whatever with no treasure to show for it. Once the practice round is done, tell everybody that that was 1 round of the game, and the full game will be 5 rounds long, and we're going to start with round 1 now. And you flip this over and put the artifact into the deck, but don't explain it yet. Just show it to everybody and explain that it's worth 5 points to whoever gets it. Don't explain how artifacts work just yet, and don't explain about putting disasters underneath these temple cards either. Leave all of that until later. You've given them enough to worry about for now, and they should be starting to develop some confidence in their ability to play at this point. Now you have to tell everybody to put all the treasures from their tent back in the middle so we can start the game proper. Yes, some of the players will moan about this, especially if they did well in the practice round. Just go along with the bit, it's all in good fun. Then put the deck in the middle, and be sure to allow someone else to give it a shuffle too, or at least cut the deck. And now, the teach is done. Your whole table's ready to play. So, when do we explain the artifacts? We explain it the first time an artifact card actually gets drawn from the deck. When that happens, just tell them that if you leave on a turn when nobody else leaves, the artifact is yours and it's worth 5 points. Don't explain what happens if there's 2 artifacts showing until you've actually got 2 artifacts showing. But definitely make a big deal out of it when they do. Make sure you say something like, if exactly 1 person leaves, they get both of these. But if 2 people leave on the same turn, they'll split the treasures, and the artifacts stay right here. Each time you start a new round, you're going to add another artifact to the deck. And you won't even have to explain that, just as long as you make a big production out of showing everybody the new card and shuffling it into the deck. Players will understand it on their own when they see you doing that. And you don't need to tell them that the 4th and 5th artifacts to exit the temple will be worth 10 points until the start of round 4, which is when that 4th artifact goes into the deck. Until then, there wouldn't be any advantage for people knowing about that, or any disadvantage for people not knowing about it, so no point in explaining until then. We also didn't explain how, when there's a disaster that scares everybody out of the temple, we take one copy of that disaster and put it underneath the card for that round, which makes it less likely for that disaster to happen again. And we don't really have to explain that, ever. All we have to do is make a big deal of showing everybody. Hey look, Sephi, see the spider? Never coming back in the game again. It's all gone. And never see it again. Isn't that great?
Lies.
Well, there's still 2 left in there, but this one won't. We didn't do this during the practice round, but in the real game, we do. You won't even have to tell them explicitly that it's now less likely for that disaster to strike again, because they'll figure that out on their own. And that feeling of figuring stuff out when nobody explained it to you, that's a huge confidence boost for new players. Let them have that moment. It'll draw them in and really make them feel that the game table is a place where they belong. Now, one note of caution here about the whole not explaining everything before you start. Everybody's heard a story about somebody who did a bad job of teaching a game because they didn't explain a particular rule until that one moment when they said, oh, did I forget to tell you this one little detail which means I win? Well, we're not doing that here, obviously. The information you're holding back in this case doesn't give you an advantage if you know it and they don't. It's just more things to think about at a time when you really want players to be focusing on having fun instead of memorizing rules. So if somebody does give you a hard time about that, you've got to play it by ear. Maybe the players at your table are the kind of people who will react well when you say, "Yup, totally did it so I could cheat, suckers." Or maybe they're the kind of people who are really interested in a full explanation of why you did it that way. Or maybe it's better to just say, "Okay, I know this looks bad, but there is method to my badness, so please trust me until the end of the game. And then after it's over, you can explain." Or maybe by then they'll get it on their own. Now, all of this may seem like a lot, and if you're a relative newcomer to modern games, yeah, it is a lot, but never forget, you and your friends are all just here to have a good time. This is not like making a public speech or doing a job interview or something. If you mess up a few things, your friends will forgive you. So why does this particular game work so well with such disparate groups of people? What is it about Incan Gold in particular that helps it to bridge that chasm between the players who want to engage with the game on one hand and players who just want to be entertained on the other? Partly it's what I was talking about before, that simple but meaningful decision about whether to stay or go, but what do I mean when I say the decision is meaningful? I mean, I think it's pretty clear what I mean when I say that it's a simple choice. It's just, I'm going to play it safe and leave with what I've got, or I'm feeling greedy and I'm staying in and trying for more. It is a simple choice because there's only 2 options, and they're both really clear. The stakes are clear and the consequences are clear. Roulette has simple decisions too, just pick a number to bet on, but I'd call that a meaningless decision because you've got nothing to base it on. I mean, unless you're a filthy cheater who can somehow arrange to know what number's going to come up next. There's never any reason to pick any particular number instead of the one next to it or the one across the table. When you're faced with a list of options that are all effectively the same, it doesn't really feel like a decision at all, and in a way, it isn't. Now, if you're a fan of roulette, you might have some sort of intuitive feeling sometimes that 17 red is coming, so you let that feeling inform your decision, despite knowing that these feelings aren't actually any more accurate than just picking a number at random. That feeling makes the decision seem meaningful, even though it's not. And of course, the decision of how much you're going to bet is very real indeed. It determines how soon you're going to have to go home because you're out of money. So if it's late and you're feeling tired and ready to go home anyway, that can meaningfully inform your decisions about the size of your bets in roulette. Now, all this can be true sometimes for people who play games to be entertained, but for players who are there to engage with it, who want to really try and play as well as they can, that approach to having fun isn't going to work. They're going to look at the game, they're going to look at the rules, they're going to do the math, And they're going to be able to tell instantly that the best move they can make is to turn around and walk out of the casino. Now, people like that, they need to be able to see the game state, look at what's happening, evaluate the situation, and make a choice based on what they know, or at least what they think. In a game like chess, for example, the game state is completely open and visible to all players at all times. All the pieces are right there on the board, nothing is hidden from anyone, and there are no random outcomes. This is what's called a perfect information game. Checkers and Connect 4 are also perfect information. The outcome of these games will arise from the decisions that the players make and nothing else. So a lot of players who are big on engaging deeply with games tend to like perfect information games a lot. But it's not so perfect when you've got players who are coming at the idea of play from more of an entertainment perspective. For a lot of them, stuff like that ends up feeling more like work you're just not getting paid to do. I mean, think about it. What do you have to do to play well in a perfect information game? You have to outthink all the other players. And since all the information is right there on the table, it's really nothing more than a matter of raw computational cycles and efficiency. Whoever most efficiently spends the most processing power on it just wins. So if you want to entertain both types of players at the same table, you need to provide decisions based at least partly on hidden information. There are a lot of ways to do this, some of which can work better than others depending on what you're going for. Take poker, for example. If a professional poker player takes on a table full of novices, the pro will almost always win. Partly because poker games, especially Texas Hold'em, the most popular poker variant these days, involve a lot of skill and calculation. But I say they'll almost always win because the cards on the top of the deck are a hidden random factor outside anyone's control. Bad beats are bound to happen sometimes. The new players can get lucky, and if that happens enough, the pro might end up losing the game. But does that make poker a good way to bridge the gap? I don't think so, because the new players won't understand the mathematical nuances going on in the game well enough to really grasp why they're winning or losing, because they haven't devoted years of their lives to it the way the pro has. They'll win the occasional hand, and they'll say, oh, okay, cool, I guess, and that's about the extent to which they can really engage with the mechanics of the game. They can't really banter over pot odds or say what hand they put you on or expected value or any of the fun stuff that really good poker players can get up to by drawing on their deep shared understanding of the game. But with Incan Gold, the game itself is almost completely transparent. There are only two pieces of hidden information that really matter. What's the next card coming in off the top of the deck, and which players are going to leave this turn. Any player, new or old, can count the cards that are on the table and see that there are so and so many left in the deck, and so many of those are a match for one of the disasters on the table, which means there's such and such a percentage chance that the next card will end the round. But most people won't do that. They'll see that there's two different disasters on the table, and one more of either of these could end it, and they'll make their choice based on their instinctive feeling about that. And here's the real magic of it. The card counting, odds calculating, hardcore game player type can be rewarded for their more intense engagement with the game without ruining it for the ones who aren't doing that, because no matter how precise their calculations, they can never truly calculate the decisions of their fellow players, and those decisions are going to matter just as much, if not more. I mean, consider what happens when you're splitting up the treasures. If you've got 6 players in and the 17 card comes up, this is the biggest treasure card in the deck, everybody still only gets 2 treasures. That's not a whole lot. But what if it's down to just 2 players? Now they're each getting 8, and that is a lot. Or what if there's only one of them left? That means they get it all. So for you, as a player, the best situation is for everybody else to leave while you stay in. But what happens if they all see that too, so none of them leaves? When there are a lot of players in the game, it's pretty common for the treasure cards to not divide up evenly, which means those remainders are going to pile up in the middle of the table, and oh wow, here we are well into the round, 3 disaster cards showing, and everybody's only collected maybe 4 treasures, but there's like 12 more in the middle. Should you leave so you can grab those treasures on your way out? I mean, everybody else seems to want to stay in. You could probably get all 12 treasures, and even if one other person gets the idea of leaving too, you could still get 6 treasures, and 6 is pretty good. But what if a bunch of them are all thinking the same thing you are? What if they all leave together? I mean, if they do that, and you stay in, then you'll be able to get way more treasure from the next few cards. But wait, what if they know that and they all decide to stay in? Well, then you should get out and grab the treasure, but wait, what if...
Truly, you have a dizzying intellect.
So this whole clearly I cannot choose the cup in front of you deal is something that game designer Bruno Faidutti loves to use in his game designs. It seems like most of them, at least somewhere, have one of these going up against a Sicilian moments in there. And it's even more so when you add the artifacts, since nobody gets those unless exactly one person leaves. This also creates great moments when there are several artifacts on the table, and things are starting to get a little dangerous in the temple, but there could still be a lot of treasure left to find, and quite a few players are still in. The suspense while you try to figure out whether to stay or go, that moment, that breathless moment when the cards get revealed and everybody looks frantically around to see how many people are still in, and the shouts and the cheers and the groans and the laughter when we see what's going to happen. It's exactly the kind of excitement that you want from a casual game night. And it's something that this game delivers, no matter how lightly or heavily the players are engaging with the underlying math. And if some of the players are trying to optimize, then sure, they might get an edge from knowing the odds, but knowing the odds is not the same thing as knowing your friends. And if the hardcores are making choices that depend on everybody else knowing the odds too, they might not always get what they're hoping for. This means the veteran players never have to ask themselves if they should go easy on the novices. It's always awkward when that question comes up, because if you just crush new players, then they might have a bad time, but if you pull your punches and they notice what you're doing, they might feel like they're being coddled. I'll probably do a video about how hard you should try to win when you're playing a game you know really well against somebody who's playing it for the first time, but that's going to be a really hard video to write, so I'm glad this game lets me kick that can a little farther down the road. This also creates an element that I consider absolutely essential for family games and casual games, and I call it Schrodinger's mad skills. I mean, in a perfect information game, you don't have any choice but to own all your failures. If you made this move and that's why you lost, and you can see it. On the other hand, in a game of pure chance like Snakes and Ladders, true, you don't have to own your failures, but you also don't get to take credit for your successes, because you only won because you got lucky, and you know it. Everybody knows it. But Incan Gold provides a happy medium with those simple and meaningful decisions. Decisions that depend on a combination of probability and psychology and instinct, things anybody can grasp. And you've also got the luck of the draw and the unpredictable chaos of your friends' minds. So when you succeed, you can congratulate yourself on brilliantly making the correct decision. And when you fail, you can just put it down to bad luck. So it feels good when you win, and it doesn't hurt so bad when you lose. Kind of like gambling with somebody else's money, really. Now, maybe in an ideal world, these game design tricks wouldn't be necessary. In an ideal world, maybe people wouldn't get all bent out of shape when they lose a game, and they wouldn't need to puff their chests up when they win, but, newsflash, the world we live in is pretty far from ideal, and a lot of us are taught to believe that being seen to fail, even in the context of a game, means that we are failures as human beings. I know it's nonsense, you know it's nonsense, and yet it still has this grip on us. And even if you are one of those rare people who is totally comfortable with winning and losing, you probably know someone who struggles with that, and you know they deserve to have fun playing games too.
I don't struggle with winning.
I really need to do a video about emotional stakes in games and why they make us feel bad when we lose. Oh, I have a lot of these videos to do, don't I? So, is there anybody you shouldn't play this game with?
Arachnophobes.
So, is there anybody you shouldn't play this game with? Well, of course, there are some. I mean, no game's for everybody, and Incan Gold is no exception. Some players, especially board game aficionados, really prefer crunchier, more complex games, and they just won't find enough substance here to engage them. There are also some broad categories of people who you might not necessarily want at your game table, no matter what game you're playing. The first is people who simply do not like games. I know there are a lot of folks out there who earnestly believe in their hearts that games are for everyone, but I'm sorry to have to be the one to tell you, it's just not true. I lived with an exception for 19 years. She's an extraordinary human, and I will love her forever, and she does not play games. If you've got someone in your family or friend group who is like that, just don't try to pressure them into joining. maybe invite them, sure, but don't give them a hard time about saying no. Secondly, there's jerks. We all know them, nobody likes them, but sometimes we get stuck with them anyway. If there's that one member of your friend group or that one person in your family who everybody kind of wishes they weren't around, maybe you don't want to invite them to join you for game night if you can avoid it. If you feel like you have no choice, well, okay, that's another video, but the general rule is if there's somebody at your table who is being genuinely mean to the other players and causing them to have a bad time, you should never invite the mean player back again. Also, a quick note about player count. The box says 3 to 8 players, but it's really better when you've got more than 3, and higher player counts are usually better. 3, honestly, isn't great. 4 is fine, 5 is good, 6 is probably the sweet spot, and 7 or 8 is also really good. If you've got 2, 3, or 4 players, you're probably better off with a different Press Your Luck game, one better suited to smaller groups. Personally, I'd recommend Can't Stop by the late great Sid Sackson. Though that one feels kind of like a TV game show, it's a little trickier to learn than Incan Gold, but it's mostly got the same appeal elements, and some players like it better, despite the learning curve. If you've got 9 or 10 players, you might be tempted to say, oh, we can just play in teams, but, okay. I'm not here to tell you how to live your life, but here's what's going to happen if you try to play in teams. The players who have to play as part of a team will either be very differential to their teammate, allowing them to make pretty much all the decisions, which means they're not really playing, or they'll insist on making all the decisions themselves, which will sideline their teammate. Or worse yet, they'll both try to defer to each other, which will make it take forever for their team to make any decisions, or they'll both try to make all the choices, which will make it take forever, while also making it super uncomfortable to watch. Plus, the other players will be able to listen in on this whole decision-making process, which will give the single players an unfair advantage over the teams. As a rule, playing teams in a game that's not designed for team play will usually lead to somebody not having as much fun as they ought to. So, unless you've really thought this through from a game design standpoint, as your games mistress, I advise you not to make your friends play half a game. When you've got 9 or 10 players, play something that's made for 9 or 10 players, like Dead Last, or Panic on Wall Street, or Telestrations, not Incan Gold. But again, I'm not the boss of you, it's your game, and now you know some of the problems you're likely to run into if you try to add a team play mechanic that the game is never designed for. And if you've figured out a way to get past those problems, that's awesome. Also, please tell me in the comments how you did it, because, well, I want to know. So one of the other reasons I picked this particular title to be the subject of our first Game Unpacking was because it's really well suited to dealing with a problem that I sincerely hope will make this video, or at least this part of the video, feel super dated in a very short time. How to play from a distance. If it's not safe to get together in the same space to play Incan Gold with your friends, playing it over Skype or Zoom or whatever is super easy. Here's how you do it. First of all, you point your webcam down at your desk or your table or whatever, then you set up your copy of the game just like you normally would. Once everybody's in the call, you can use your game components to teach the game pretty much the way I showed you. The other players don't need to own a copy of the game, but they will need 2 cards they can use to indicate whether they're staying or leaving. If they've got a deck of regular playing cards, they could use those. They could use like an 8 for stay and a queen for leave. Like 8 stay, queen leave. They don't quite rhyme, but could sort of help to remember. Anyway, if they've got post-it notes, those can make it a lot easier to remember which one's which. And if they don't have a deck of playing cards, they can use business cards or takeout menus or basically any small flat object that they've got 2 identical copies of. When you draw a card from the quest deck, you set it in the middle and dish out the treasures, putting them next to the tents, just like if you were playing in person, and then everybody picks a card, or whatever they're using, holds it in front of their camera, and on a count of 3, everybody flips, and away we go. You might also want to get some post-it notes for the tents to help you keep track of which one is which, and you can turn them so that you can't see inside. If you want to get really fancy, you can have a little extra card for each player and flip it face down when they leave, so everybody can see who's in and who's out. Now, the players won't be able to look inside their tents to see how many treasures they've got so far, but you can make a point of telling them how many treasures they get whenever somebody does go back to their tent, and you can encourage them to make a note of those totals. That way they can sort of do the equivalent of checking inside their tents by adding up the numbers that they've got so far. In my experience, most players never bother counting what's in their tent until the game's over anyway. When you're running the game at your desk or wherever, you might also sometimes have trouble with running out of the little one-point treasures, the turquoise ones, because you're not going to want to peek inside the other players' tents to see if they've got enough to make change. But if you've got poker chips or coins or something, that should help. Now, I'm a big believer in the power of playing games together in the same space, and there are a lot of games that lose most or even all of their magic when you can't be together in the same room to play them. This one, happily, keeps most of its fun intact, even when you're playing from a distance. Again, I really hope that by the time you watch this part of the video will be super dated. But if not, it's nice to know that you can still get some of the joy of play, even in times like these. Well, that about wraps it up for the channel's first Game Unpacking video. Please let me know in the comments which parts were useful or entertaining, which parts could use maybe a bit more detail, and which parts could perhaps do with being a bit shorter. We've got a lot more games we want to unpack, and if you want to have a hand in choosing which game to do next, you can join the channel's Patreon for that and other neat stuff too. If the idea of hosting a game night sounds fun, but you'd still like some more help preparing for it, you can also hire me for a consultation at joanthegamesmistress.com, where I can help you pick a good game to suit your players, give you tips for how to teach it, and make sure everyone has a good time playing. If you can't afford any of that, please do keep tuning in. This stuff isn't supposed to just only be for people who can afford to give me money. You can always help me out with a like, sub, ding if you want, and you can go farther by passing these videos on to people who you think might like them, and even more so by joining the conversation down in the comments. I'd love to hear about your experiences playing this and other Press Your Luck games. But remember, mean comments get deleted and mean people get banned, so play nice. Your turn.
Yeah, I'm in charge of the comment section, and we want to unpack games, not the comments. Thanks.
The Seffi Banhammer does not mess around.
I don't mess around.
Except when you feel like it.